money trauma, and a lot of money trauma is it's combined. It's mainly comprised of two fields. It's behavioral economics and it's psychology. And I know that when we think of money trauma, we're initially just thinking of, yeah, I need a therapist, which is great. I'm all for therapists. But you know what you need? You also need someone who's trained in behavioral economics because that's the other big piece of it. Because what it does, it affects our ability to build wealth because it affects our outlook on risk. It affects our money mindset. And there's years and years and years upon conditioning that we have to break through in terms of our mindset. Because we all operate from this subconscious mind. And it's so funny that all of those patterns and habits are formed in childhood. Yeah. And it's hard if we're not self-aware to kind of, think, well, yeah, is this a trauma pattern? Is this a trauma bond? Is this really preventing me from moving forward in my business? This kind of mindset. And that's key to also overcoming money trauma.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Welcome back. I am so thrilled about today's episode because it's one of my favorite topics to cover, and that's wealth building. Now, I love when we get to talk about money and wealth, but I especially love when we get to go deeper and talk about the root of our relationship with money. Joining me today to lead the conversation is Keisha Blair, who's a trained economist and author of Holistic Wealth, 36 life lessons to help you recover from financial disruption, find your life purpose, and achieve financial freedom. During this episode, you're going to learn what the term holistically wealthy, which was coined by Keisha, actually means, and how you can become holistically wealthy as an entrepreneur. Because as a business owner and entrepreneur, you know all too well the financial risk involved in business. So today, you're also going to learn how to deal with and prepare for financial setbacks. So let's dive right in. Keisha, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. So grateful to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. So I like to start with, if you can just start by telling my audience a little bit about who you are. I know we're going to dive into it, but who you are, what is it that you do in your business, and how did you get where you are today?
Absolutely. So I'm Keisha Blair, and I'm an author, an entrepreneur, a podcaster, and I started out initially with writing and just, publishing the first edition of my book, Holistic Wealth, in 2019. So when I published that book, I coined the term Holistic Wealth with that book, and that grew into the Holistic Wealth movement. It grew into a global movement. And so I'm the founder of that Holistic Wealth movement. And then due to the demand from the book, so just to explain to the audience, to give some context. So I wrote this viral article back in 2017. It was entitled, "My Husband Died at age 34. Here are 40 life lessons I learned from it." And that book went viral. That article, went viral. And so many people contacted me. An agent contacted me and said, "You need to turn this into a book." And so that article was turned into a book because it had touched a nerve globally. I had people reach out to me from many countries around the world. And we named it Holistic Wealth. And that was the first edition of the book that came out in 2019 that sparked that global movement. And then due to demand from that book, I had women coming forward and saying, we want to be certified holistic wealth consultants. We want to give workshops and we want to go out into our communities to train other women, to train men, to train everyone on your methods, because there's a huge gap in the financial industry right now with advice that women
Yes.
and men are getting. And it's so true. It's so true. And a lot of that came out through my book as well. And so these are, highly educated women, financial advisors who came forward. And so I established the Institute on Holistic Wealth in 2020, early 2020, to respond to that demand. And so we've been training an army of certified holistic wealth consultants. We've also just recently launched other certification programs, like we've launched the Trauma of Money certification program, and we've launched a holistic healing certification program. And I mean, the Institute is also a membership platform, so people can become members, to access resources and other ebooks, courses, that type of thing. And then, of course, we have other courses, other very short courses on the Institute's website, so people can, whether it's to delve deeper into their personal financial identities, or developing a personal mission, or if you're planning on taking a sabbatical, we have courses that are relevant to the material covered in the book. So basically, that's how it got started, and kind of the journey. But it's been an amazing journey, and it's grown organically, which is a blessing too, that, it was spurred, the demand for this came from the readers. So that's how it got started.
I love that. And I will say, when I saw the holistic wealth come across my desk, I was like, I'm intrigued. I want to know more about that, especially as it relates to entrepreneurship and, the things like you mentioned, your story. So I'm excited about today's conversation, which is about how to be holistically wealthy as an entrepreneur. So thank you for sharing your story. Such an amazing story. And I want to dive into the importance of focusing on wealth, building wealth as an entrepreneur. So, as you mentioned before, you coined the term holistically wealthy. I want to first start from the beginning and talk about first, what does it mean to be wealthy and what does that look like? And, if you could just touch on being wealthy versus being rich.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and just to mention, at the Institute, a lot of our work is geared towards entrepreneurs, because a lot of those women who came forward were, entrepreneurs doing their own businesses, but they wanted to pass on, and as you mentioned, what it means to be wealthy and what does that look like. I think that is the gap there, that, we tend to focus on our net worth and tracking our net worth, which is great. That's a very useful exercise. But as we've seen with COVID-19 and this pandemic, it's brought home how interconnected different pillars of wealth. And I define holistic wealth as, a concept that has key pillars such as your physical, mental, spiritual health, as well as, financial independence, your relationships, a life mission, your spirituality. So that is kind of the holistic wealth concept. Like, I know when the traditional meaning of wealth and what it means to be wealthy is more geared to your net worth and your physical, possessions, assets, your portfolio, and the like. But that's basically just being rich, as you said. That's basically just being rich. And of course, we've seen, in recent times, being rich does not equate to being rounded. It's not, a key factor in terms of building resilience. It's not, yes, it's one of, kind of like, I guess if you look at it as one pillar. But when you talk about holistic wealth, you're talking about a framework too that helps you build resilience and helps you to overcome life-altering setbacks. So, so that's basically how I would see being wealthy versus being rich. Now, I do emphasize financial independence in that definition of holistic wealth, because I would love, people to have that goal of becoming financially independent, because it also helps so that when you have a life-altering setback, you can, take care of your needs, and you can take a break if you need to take a break. Let's say if you get ill or a family member becomes ill, then you can take that break.
Yeah. And it makes me think about what you said before, is especially during COVID-19, I think a lot of people had a revelation as to where they are in their lives. And especially in entrepreneur businesses were affected. Even if you were working for yourself, it was like, is my business really able to take care of me? Do I have the means to take care of me if everything shuts down? So
Right.
like, to me, that means like having that proper plan in place, like the financial plan in place, to make sure that things are taken care of if crisis happens.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah, that's what I see. And then, so one of the things I think is important to start with, so that the audience kind of goes along this journey with us to being holistically wealthy. You mentioned that you published the first version of your book, and then you recently have published an expanded version of your book, Holistic Wealth. So I want to talk about what exactly the book is about, and what do you want the reader to take away from this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So in March, we released the expanded and updated version,
Mm-hmm.
which also has lessons in it, not only from the Holistic Wealth podcast that I host, but also from, other luminaries and trailblazers, and also from a few of our certified holistic wealth consultants, and how they have built their businesses, because all of them are entrepreneurs. And really, this version of the book, which I think is great for entrepreneurs, it really emphasizes more the concept of having a holistic wealth portfolio. And I think every entrepreneur should have one. It's so easy to succumb to burnout as an entrepreneur. It's so easy to, as you said, fall in the trap of where you're doing everything. You don't feel resilient. You don't feel
Right.
holistically wealthy because you're exhausted, your mental health is suffering, you're trying to keep up with technology. There's just so many factors at play when you're an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur. So this book actually highlights, that holistic wealth portfolio, what's needed, what are the key pillars of that, and why it's so important. So it really is kind of like a progression from the first book. And it's a progression in terms of even my entrepreneurship experience, and setting up the institute and having trained certified holistic wealth consultants, and having heard about their journey, and some of the issues they've had, and some of them have spoke quite frankly even on the Holistic Wealth podcast in terms of their journey and the struggles that they face. So this book is an amazing tool and a resource for entrepreneurs, because it can really set the stage for success in your business. It can really help you do that by focusing on all the right metrics and having them in place, and planning for setbacks, and planning for pivoting in your business. So that's basically what this edition, this new and expanded edition, is about. It's kind of taken the journey and the movement, and compiled more lessons to help people. I mean, it can help anyone, and entrepreneurs in particular too, with their journey. As there's so many entrepreneurs who are interviewed in the book.
I love it. I love it. So yeah, I think that's so key. And people find that, like, that kinship, that familiarity with people that they experience, like their stories they can relate to, relatability. So I think that's so important, that you have stories from actual entrepreneurs to see that transformation. And so one of the things I want to talk about before we dive into how to get to this holistically wealthy journey as an entrepreneur is, first, why it's important for people to, especially Black entrepreneurs, to think about and to be holistically wealthy. So I know that you have a background in economics and working with various capacities as a senior economic advisor, including with the federal government. So I want to first talk about some of the challenges that you initially saw that Black entrepreneurs face when it comes to building wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important topic for Black entrepreneurs as well. And I've had so many on the Holistic Wealth podcast who've talked about their journey and also, just the struggles they face, just even securing loans. Some of them talk about the struggles of even securing just a basic small loan for their business, and they couldn't secure that. One example is Mahisha Dillinger, who is the founder of Curls and CEO, and she's doing amazingly well now. But in the beginning, she spoke about that. The founders of 241 Cosmetics, who ended up on Oprah's favorite things list in 2020, and basically said they couldn't even secure venture capital, and as we know, Black entrepreneurs struggle with securing venture capital. Like, I think it's just 1% of Black entrepreneurs that, can secure it. And they mentioned that, growing up, they were refugees from Africa, so they didn't have that network to tap into. And they didn't even have a boot to bootstrap their business. Right. So I think for entrepreneurs, for Black entrepreneurs, we face so many obstacles. And then, of course, for many of us, it's the first time in our family, or it's something that we're spearheading, maybe a new innovative concept, and we're struggling with, trademarking, or we're struggling with coming up with funds to do additional things that we need to do. And it's hard when you're in the minority and you're going up, you're competing, right, against these other big, well-funded businesses who have a wealth of support and a wealth of dollars too. So, and of course, there's also the issue of, copying and copyright. And I've heard this from other Black entrepreneurs, that of their ideas being stolen, their models and their thoughts being stolen. And even as an author, right? Black women are not even quoted as much as other people, and it's a form of erasure, and it's something that, as Black people, we struggle with, getting that recognition and honor for our work, even as we're creating a legacy. So those are some of the important barriers, and this is why, from a mental health, physical health, spiritual health, emotional health, and financial wellness perspective, this is why this concept is so key for Black entrepreneurs. I kid you not, like, it's so easy to get burnt out. It's so easy to think of just giving up because of the hurdles that Black entrepreneurs face. But I really think this is a framework that also helps you build your resilience muscles and become a better entrepreneur. And as and as the Institute, we help entrepreneurs, as I said, build out their holistic wealth portfolios. And as you build it out, it helps you to get more of a handle on what's your larger vision and mission. Why are you doing the work? Who are the key people that you really, really want to reach, and why? And what are the financial pieces of your business? How are you basically maintaining your emotional and physical health while you build that business? I don't remember what the stats are in terms of mental health for entrepreneurs, but it's alarming. There's a mental health epidemic in entrepreneurship right now. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, for Black entrepreneurs, it would be far worse, because we face so much more hurdles to success. And so, yes, my background as an economist helps tremendously with, all aspects of thinking through, building frameworks, building systems, because that's what I had to do for myself when I suffered a setback, a life-altering setback. So I'm glad that I was able to tap into those skills to also help others do the same.
So Keisha, one of the things that you mentioned is that, it's a journey. And one of the things you also mentioned before is like this trauma of money that people have and people face. So in your experience, if a listener is listening, how does that relate to them building wealth, that trauma of money, their experience of trauma of money that they have? And then how do they overcome that?
Yeah, such an important question, Monique. Because we don't realize how much money trauma holds us back. Money trauma, and a lot of money trauma is it's combined. It's mainly comprised of two fields. It's behavioral economics and it's psychology. And I know that when we think of money trauma, we're initially just thinking of, yeah, I need a therapist, which is great. I'm all for therapists. But you know what you need? You also need someone who's trained in behavioral economics because that's the other big piece of it. Because what it does, it affects our ability to build wealth because it affects our outlook on risk. It affects our money mindset. And there's years and years and years upon conditioning that we have to break through in terms of our mindset. Because like we all operate from this subconscious mind. And it's so funny that all of those patterns and habits are formed in childhood.
Yeah.
And it's hard if we're not self-aware to kind of, think, well, yeah, is this a trauma pattern? Is this a trauma bond? Is this really preventing me from moving forward in my business? This kind of mindset. And that's key to also overcoming money trauma. And in the certified trauma of money program that I built, we go through each module kind of like, okay, let's start with, your history. Let's trace your history of trauma and disruption. What does that look like? And it's so amazing, especially for Black folks and for Black entrepreneurs, how early some of that starts. When you start to plot that personal disruption timeline, it's just unbelievable. And so we have gotten so many negative messages too, as Black people, about what we can and cannot do, what resources we have access to and we should have access to, what wealth should look like for us and how much wealth we should have. So there's limits, and we were brought up with these limits, and not necessarily from, people in our community. I'm talking about people outside our community who put limits on us, right? And for those of us who've had real tragic life-altering setbacks, like the death of a spouse or the death of a child or the death of someone else close to us, it's really important to really, take on this work to become a better entrepreneur, to figure out what your risk profile looks like, to figure out if trauma has been holding you back in terms of your investments, in terms of your attitude towards money, in terms of what you think are limits on where you can build out your business. So it's such crucial work. And as I said earlier, it's important to also have someone with a behavioral economics background to point out those blind spots, those pitfalls that aren't necessarily going to be covered in another course that's just basically focused on just one aspect. So that's the good thing about programs like this, Monique, is that we can really talk through why this is so important, and also why this is so important for us as Black people to pass on this within our community, because we also have very specific trauma experiences, right, with slavery and what our forefathers went through and how much of that was passed down, and what we had to go through, different generations of Black people and to get where they are. And so that there's a lot of work around that to be worked through as well.
Yes, certainly. And that makes me think about, we had a past episode with Denitha Doe, and she was talking also about the money mindset and just some of the behaviors from childhood, not even thinking about how your relationship with money is, if it comes from your childhood, how things were within your family, your finances and things like that. So that is such an important thing to note. And then also, one of the things I wanted to talk about is how you mentioned it's important to have someone who focuses on this behavior from a behavior aspect. But also, what happens if people are not thinking about building this holistically wealthy mindset and what that could do and how that could affect their business?
Yeah, absolutely. As we were talking about, let's say, trauma and money mindset, it also helps you, this holistic wealth mindset, to it's a starting point to get over that. For instance, with someone who embraces the holistic wealth mindset, they think about setbacks not in permanent terms but in temporary terms, so it really helps them in terms of their resilience and their perseverance, because they know, what, this is just temporary, not permanent. Someone who embraces the holistic wealth mindset thinks win-win, not lose-lose. So they're thinking of, I'm helping others and I'm getting that help too. It's not a lose-lose scenario. And again, with risk, a person who embraces the holistic wealth mindset embraces taking measured risks towards their goal. And as I mentioned, earlier with risk taking, money, when you experience a trauma, and there's so many statistics out there, Monique, on children who lived through different wars. I remember in the certification program I wrote, the children who lived in Nigeria and went through the Nigerian Civil War had a completely risk-averse profile. They couldn't think about taking on any risk because they were so traumatized. And this is as adults, right? So this is like 20, 30 years afterwards. And so it's very, 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 very important for us to really become self-aware and to think about our money mindset and what are the things that happened, that really shaped that. And a lot of that, as you said, and as we've been discussing, are from childhood. But it's so important that we think through that, especially as entrepreneurs, as Black entrepreneurs, because we face so many hurdles. It's easy to want to give up. It's easy to think, you know what, how am I going to make it in a sea of competitors that are so much more well-funded? They're getting all the media exposure and I'm not getting any. I'm not even being quoted, right? So it's easy to have that mindset where you're thinking, no, there's just no way I'm going to make it. But there's so many within even our communities. There's just so many examples of entrepreneurs that have made it.
I love that. Yes. One of growth. Yes. So if someone is listening today, what advice would you give them for ways that they could start today, as in, beginning their holistically wealth journey? So it's something that's been on their mind. And as you mentioned before, this includes, enrichment of all aspects of life, including your financial health, your physical health, your emotional and spiritual well-being, and even the relationships. So what advice would you give an entrepreneur listening to start this journey if this is something that they're struggling with, but know that they need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first step is there's some micro steps that I always focus on that people can take away right now as they're listening, and people can, write down. So what is my mission? What does that look like for my life and for this business? Because I think we also need to frame it as my life and for this business, especially if we look at it from a holistic wealth perspective, because we don't want to neglect our family and then end up divorced or end up, suicidal because we're building this business. And so it's important what that mission statement can look like. And it's aligned with your values, whatever your values are. You can outline those, write down those values. And the second micro step is, so at the Institute on our website, we have this free personal financial identity quiz. And it's so important for entrepreneurs to actually know what their financial identity is and to embrace the strengths and really be aware of the weaknesses. So, for instance, and people can take the quiz. It takes 2 minutes to get your results. You can be a minimalist, a maximalist, anxious spender, or a risk taker. And each one, there's no best or worst. Each one has, strengths and weaknesses. And in business, it's really good to know. And it's really good to be able to communicate this in your own personal money story and in your own personal holistic wealth portfolio. But those are two critical micro steps that, people can start doing right now, even as they're listening, and figuring out, how to embrace this and how to build this in their life.
Love it. Love it. And I love it. And I think that a lot of, as you mentioned before, like a lot of people deal with, when it comes to entrepreneurs, especially their risk level, their risk tolerance, but also having to deal with uncertainty and disruption is part of being an entrepreneur, as we know. So what tips would you have for someone who is dealing with overcoming the fear of uncertainty and things are coming to disrupt, and how this can hinder their ability to build wealth?
Absolutely. And it's such a critical question now, Monique, as we're thinking about, what's going on in the world now. We have, an economy, global economy struggling. We have a war with Russia and Ukraine. So we're really living in a disruptive world. And so when we think about even now with businesses struggling through COVID-19, right, and they're struggling with the cost of transportation, the cost of inputs going up, inflation is going up. I mean, mortgages are going up, and it seems to be almost overnight. That can be a very destabilizing thing for businesses who are, starting up bootstrapped and not with a whole lot of funding then, and with entrepreneurs who are even struggling to get loans. And so one of the things, plan for two major setbacks per decade. So when you build out your holistic wealth portfolio, plan for two big setbacks per decade and put that in terms of, when you're doing your risk profile, when you're stress testing your financial independence portfolio, because the financial independence portfolio is one aspect of your holistic wealth portfolio. And it's always good to stress test it. It's always good to be like, okay, let me put this under a model, right, that could survive potentially two life-altering setbacks per decade. What would that look like for me and my business and my personal goals? And we've seen it borne out, right, with the level of disruption. I mentioned that the decade from 2000 to 2009 was known as the lost decade because we had so many upheavals economically. And that decade was known as the lost decade. And we didn't have COVID. We didn't have this war with Ukraine and Russia. Just this morning, the IMF downgraded the global economy by 35% in terms of the outlook for growth.
Wow.
And that's across the entire global economy. So right now, we have almost, it's not unprecedented, but it's veering to territory where, governments are struggling. And so this is what I would, say to people listening in, try to really build out that framework. And of course, we're here to help, but try to build out a framework that can withstand two major shocks per decade and build out, that financial piece so that you have your savings, so that you have the shock absorbers in it, extra accounts and investments and income and savings so that you can weather those setbacks. Because I think increasingly, and I said this in the book, and to be honest, Monique, when I said this, I didn't even know we would have this war with Russia and the Ukraine, that we might be facing another lost decade, right? It looks like we might be facing that. And when I wrote that, we weren't even anywhere near this point. So I think that's likely to happen. And as an economist who, as you said, like I've worked on development economics and behavioral economics, and I've advised, like I've traveled the world and at the highest levels and advised. I think that's the best advice that I can give is for entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs who face multiple barriers to scaling and to growing, is to plan ahead and to really, watch and plan, to have a few buffers in your portfolio so that when those, setbacks come and the economic turmoil, that you can weather that storm.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's a perfect way to round up with one of the things I was so happy to see is that in your interview with Yahoo Finance's The Round, you mentioned that millennials are actually the holistic wealth generation. Now, a lot of our listeners are millennials. And why is this true? Although I was glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yes, I did say that, and it's so funny. I'm not, excluding, others, like the Gen X's and I'm not excluding, I don't mean to exclude anyone, but I've admired how millennials think, and I think it's holistically wealthy thinking just by the way they invest. They really look at mission and purpose behind a company that they get behind. They look at their values, and they look at social justice. We just have to see the movement and the different movements that have been formed, that have been driven by millennials, right? Like even the Great Resignation wave, I would take a wager on. I haven't seen statistics to prove this, but I would say that like that was driven by millennials too. And, and that's a big part of it. And they think about work-life balance so much more.
Yeah.
They think about, taking, time to cultivate meaningful experiences, right, in their lives. So sabbaticals and travel and traveling the world and all of those things that I talk about in Holistic Wealth that enriched me personally and allowed me to become more resilient and able to weather storms. I just found that, millennials kind of embrace that worldview, and especially when it comes on to social justice, which is a big part of the work that, I've outlined in this edition of the book too. It's more about that as we went through the racial reckoning in 2020 with the death of George Floyd. And I wanted to address those issues of race more forcefully in this book and even outline my experience, which I didn't do in the first edition. And I really wanted people to realize that in order for us to have holistically wealthy communities, social justice and all of that needs to be a part of it. We're also going through a racial epidemic. Racism has been declared an epidemic by the WHO. And social justice is a big part of how we achieve holistic wealth. So that's a big part of this, as well as even with the work that we do at the Institute. A lot of those themes carry through all of our courses, because even as Black entrepreneurs, we know that that's a big part of the struggles and hurdles that we face. So I think millennials have really captured that essence quite well.
Yes, I am a millennial myself, so I definitely agree. And that is something that I do as a part of my life, but also as a part of my business, something that I'm very mindful of, which brings me to my next question for those who are listening, who are entrepreneurs who are listening, just how they can also incorporate this into their business and how they run their businesses. Thinking about when it comes to employees, building a team, the company culture, all of those things.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that we're trying now to, the work that we're trying to spearhead at the Institute is weaving in this concept in organizations. And as you said, even in, businesses and even in small business. And one of the things that I came up with, and, it helps to have holistic wealth project groups and even within an organization and a small business, it's a great tool for having it really practically laid out in your everyday operations, getting people to practice holistic wealth on a day-to-day basis with how we deal with each other in our relationships and with our business and wellness at work, and what does wellness at work look like. And it's so amazing that a lot of the stress that we face in life is stems from the workplace or business and just by nature of how busy we are and what we need to get done. And so I think it's a wonderful way to incorporate that in the day-to-day aspects of your business, getting employees to buy into that, like this is the company's mission, this is the business mission, and here is how it aligns with yours. And I think holistic wealth project groups where people can write down their missions and talk about how it aligns with the business and how their work in that business is allowing them to fulfill that mission and purpose in life makes it so much more purposeful and gives them so much more meaning as they're, going into work and thinking about the work they do and how they're impacting lives. And so that's one tiny aspect of it, to be honest. It also has to do with, as I said, in terms of personal financial wellness and what that looks like. It also has to do with work-life balance and emotional wellness. and physical health at work, whether it's taking short breaks or doing a short meditation exercise at your desk, or taking your lunchtime to walk around the block or take a nature walk, whatever that might look like, can be really, really embraced in a business setting, in a work setting, within teams. And so it's a really good way, a practical way of practicing it every day, day in, day out in a business framework.
Yes. And I think that's what once you have that in your company and a part of your culture, that is what entices people and wants to make them work with you, actually, because it's something that they see that you care about. You care about them, you care about their well-being, but you also care about, moving the business forward.
Absolutely. And there's a story I share in the book. It's a very painful story, Monique, but it's true. My husband, he started dying at work, and he had a long lineup of colleagues at his door, because he was a finance manager, and a long line of colleagues waiting to check their work. And he started, he didn't know he was that ill, to be honest. He didn't know. It was very sudden onset, but he started bleeding internally. And, he went on with his work until he left at the end of the day and came home. And by that time, it was too late. And this is why I'm imploring everyone listening in and organizations to take this very, very seriously, because we make life and death decisions at work. Whether it's at work in our own businesses or at work in somebody else's business, we make life and death decisions under tremendous amounts of stress. And we have a culture of, we measure the wrong things. We're measuring all these different things that really, you know what I mean? They don't necessarily mean that a worker is productive, but we need to give workers the latitude, for them to be able to get up and to say, you know what, I'm not feeling well. I think I need to run to the doctor. I think I need to run to the emergency room and just take everything, put everything down and run. And so this is a very personal message for me, because it's impacted my family. It's impacted my children who grew up without a father. And I'm saying it to everyone listening in, that this is a life and death thing. This is not, just a nice to have. You have workers who die on the job every day, and, their families are left without a husband, a father, a parent. And it's something that we absolutely need to take very seriously.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that one of the things that it brings up is, we've also talked about it before on the podcast with Giselle, speaking about just how to become a revolutionary leader. But we also talked about some of the things as entrepreneurs, specifically Black entrepreneurs, that we face from history and generations of just this mindset of really like working so hard and not resting and not taking the time to pause and take care of ourselves. But how we have to redefine how we grow and work in our businesses and what that looks like. So I want to ask you this, like, where do you think that comes from, that work mentality, and how, because I know a lot of people struggle with that. Just your story alone is enough to make me pause. Yeah. But where does that come, and how can people who are facing that right now understand that, like you said, it's not a choice, but how we have to look at it and take heed and say, okay, this is something I really need to change?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's such an important one, especially for us in the Black community who, our ancestors have been through years of oppression. And for us growing up, the message was always work, work, work. If you don't work yourself to death, you won't reach anywhere. And you need to work twice as hard as the others to get noticed. And you need to, go out there and work, work, work. And it's one of those things that was passed down and through very, very, very well-intentioned means. And it's actually a money block because we think the only way we can have wealth or money is to work ourselves to death, which is actually very sad, because what we end up doing is the reverse. Because you know what? It's a mindset of scarcity and lack. It's a scarcity mentality, and there were so many things withheld from our ancestors, right? There were land was withheld, money was withheld, basic human rights were withheld. And so once we got a chance, and once they had a chance to hold on to anything, they had to work to get somewhere. And so what happened is it passed down through generations of kind of like the same thing, even though times have changed, and even
Mm-hmm.
though we have access now to far more now, even though we still have a lot of barriers. And so it is a money block because it stems from scarcity, and it stems from that scarcity mindset, which is why the holistic wealth mindset is so much more important. That mindset of, well, is this an addition? And that's the holistic wealth method. Is this an addition to my holistic wealth bank account or not? And my
Mm-hmm.
holistic wealth bank account is not just a money thing. It's everything. It's my wellness, it's my spiritual needs, it's my physical, my mental health. Am I going to put myself in jeopardy when I go this extra mile? When I really should be heading to the doctor? Am I going to put myself in jeopardy when I make this decision under tremendous amounts of stress, even though I'm having a massive headache, I'm having a massive, stomach ache? So I think that's why this concept of holistic wealth is so, so, so
Mm-hmm.
important as we, go through the remainder of this pandemic, and as we think about what we want our post-pandemic lives to look like. I think this is one of the most revolutionary concepts, and I'm glad that it's just taking hold and people are realizing that
Yeah.
this can be a life or death scenario. Like
It's,
I've talked about my personal experience, so
mm-hmm.
I think it's something that, as we go through as entrepreneurs, as parents, as workers, that we keep mindful about.
Yes, certainly. I agree. And so I want to talk about, end it off with the problems that you are solving and the offers that you have. So you've mentioned the Holistic Wealth Institute. I really want to dive into it offering financial advice targeted at women, filling a much needed gap in financial advising that was exacerbated, like you mentioned, by the pandemic. But I want to talk about how it is creating that change and helping your audience first, and then also how someone who's listening, they connect and they know that they need help in this way, so how your business can help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Institute on Holistic Wealth is the world's first institution established with a focus on holistic wealth coaching, certification, and education. And it really was created as a result of the book and the tremendous, outpouring of support from the book. And a lot of what we teach is also revolutionary. It's built to address the gaps out there. And for Black entrepreneurs, it's also built to take into consideration our unique challenges. For instance, in the Certified Holistic Wealth Consultant program, there's an entire module on anti-Black racism. And that was built in mind for entrepreneurs, for Black entrepreneurs, for all entrepreneurs to be so much more aware of the challenges out there and why we need to be doing this. And of course, as you mentioned, there's the trauma of money course. But everything that we offer, and holistic healing, that's another certification program, but everything that we offer is geared to basically rounding out how you build your business and how you can go on to be holistically wealthy as you scale and grow your business. Say, for instance, the Trauma of Money course that actually walks you through the steps of rewriting your personal money story. And even as an entrepreneur, rewriting your own personal money story. And by the time you're done, you've done all of that. And the holistic healing certification is also complementary to that, because then there are the tools in there to help you with that ongoing healing journey, which is so, important, because people think, well, I've addressed it. I'm more self-aware, but it's a constant journey of healing. And so even as an entrepreneur, these are the tools that, we don't get taught in our MBA programs or in our economics programs, but they're so important for or ongoing survival as entrepreneurs. And so the institute was geared towards that. It's helping people and entrepreneurs achieve time freedom and money freedom. And all of these certification programs actually help you to earn an extra income. And so if you are in a field where you're doing coaching, or even if you're not, you can take these certification programs and offer certain services to your clients to also help your clients become holistically wealthy. So all of that is also built in because what we really want to do is empower people economically as well in a holistic way. So that's how we're creating change and helping people create a new normal. And as I said, like we have holistic wealth consultants and doing workshops. Like I have one consultant who does workshops with Girl Guides and with 4-H clubs, and she teaches some of this holistic wealth concept. So we really want to get into schools. We really want to get to kids as young as possible to try to teach these concepts so that, it becomes ingrained in them. So once they reach adulthood,
Yes.
how they measure their wealth and what they think of, who's truly wealthy and really what wealth means to them is critical, I think. So that's kind of the work that we're trying to do.
I love that. And I love that it is certainly that thought of it's just more than money. It's more than money. It's more than about money. And I love it. And I also wanted to say, like you mentioned, you have consultants and you're also an author. So how do you stay organized, Keisha? What are some of your favorite tools and resources that have really helped you in your journey?
Yeah, so I'm not like a big fan. I won't say I'm like a big roaring fan of Microsoft Excel, but I do use it for a lot of basic things.
Mm-hmm.
I do use it for some of my work in terms of keeping track of things and also, there are other tools. I do, want to mention that there's a companion book, the Holistic Wealth Personal Workbook, that has a budgeting spreadsheet and that has a framework for writing personal mission statements. So I built out that budgeting, sheet from, how I do my budgeting and how I track certain
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some tools that, people listening in can also use as they go through their journey. But that's what I do. And for my business too, I do have, so much help and also for the podcast. So I do, I
Yes.
have given myself a lot of different ways of getting organized and staying organized, but writing down and, and keeping track through whether it's, through various calendars, things like that. That's basically how I stay organized.
Yes, I am such a calendar person too, and I can only imagine because running a podcast is a lot. So, and then you also have a podcast as well. Can you say the name of your podcast again?
Sure. It's the Holistic Wealth Podcast with Keisha Blair.
Awesome. And Keisha, my final question is, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
You know what? I'm one of those people who's so proud of my heritage. I'm
Love it.
all for my community, and I'm just so proud of how far we've come and what we've been able to achieve. And for me, being Black in business is just wrapped up in that. It's just
Mm-hmm.
this identity of not only wanting to further my community, but also wanting to shed light on our various struggles and really try to, make things better for us. So that's wrapped up in that identity for me, and also just being just so proud of the work that we've been doing collectively and how far we've come. I have goosebumps when I think about it because I've always been that that person who was
Yes.
always just extra proud and just that identity to me means everything. So that's what it means to me, is that it's just wrapped up in the work that I want to do to help advance that community.
So beautiful. Yes, I agree. I love it. And someone is listening and they are wanting to connect with you, support you, reach out to you or follow you. how can they do that?
Sure. So my website is KeishaBlair.com, and you can reach out to me at info@KeishaBlair.com. The Institute on Holistic Wealth is also another point of contact. Feel free to reach out to become a member or to do one of the certification programs. I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Keisha O'Blair, and on Facebook at Keisha Blair Author. So I love hearing from listeners and from readers, and I really genuinely, love hearing the stories about how the work has impacted people. And so if people want to reach out, I'd be happy to hear from hear from listeners.
Amazing. Well, Keisha, this has been so insightful and just so wonderful. It's changed my perspective. And I really want to thank you for being on the show. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and sharing what you do.
Thank you so much for having me, Monique. It was amazing being here.
I'm so glad we had this conversation because it's so true that how we operate as adults is directly tied to our upbringings, our conditioning. So there's daily work to do some of the unlearning that needs to be done and create new healthy habits. If not, it will cost you your business. It will cost you your financial freedom. It will cost you those goals and that lifestyle that you want. I love that Keisha shared her own personal story about the unfortunate death of her husband and her own wake-up call from that experience. If you didn't understand before listening to this conversation, please understand now how important it is for you to be holistically wealthy. It's not just about money, but it's about your health, your mindset. It's about your happiness. This has been such a treat, and I get so happy that you show up with us every week. You can check out all the resources mentioned by Keisha at blacktobusiness.com/104, and we've also linked her book information there as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you next week. Same time, same place.